welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Lena Levin. She is a healthcare entrepreneur and a co-founder of Via Surgical. She wrote the Kevin MD article, "Here's How Doctors Can Support MedTech Innovation." Lena, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me. I've been listening to your podcast for so long, and being on the other side of the podcast, that's really exciting for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. And we'll get into your article in a little bit. But first off, can you just share your story and journey to where you are today?
Yes. So I moved to Israel in my early 19s and from Russia. I'm made Aliyah, what we call in Israel. And immediately I joined the university circles. I started to study. This is where I met my co-founders. We were just students dreaming about creating an impact, as I think any young people during their university time do. And we were thinking in technological terms. Back then, I was a Technion student, and this is the decade of very important period of time for Technion, where this university won 3 Nobel Prizes, 2 in chemistry and 1 in natural science. So we were just in the middle of this bubble of innovation, of startup hub, and we were thinking and playing with different ideas. As any students, we participated in international entrepreneurship competition of Technion, and we won the first place. This is how it started. This is how I became an entrepreneur. So my first idea, it was by chance. I was thinking to do something that has an impact on the world, but I really didn't know what to do. I'm not a surgeon, not a physician even. Although I took several courses just to understand more in depth the method, the structure. And I was thinking either about green energy or healthcare, something that helps the world and the people. So the idea, we won the first place, we got exposure, we were funded at the very early stage of our career, just graduating from the university. And the first thing I did, I just flew to the first surgical conference. As today, I remember it was SAGES in Phoenix. I think it was 2012, maybe 11. And I started to meet with the surgeons. For me, as a young entrepreneur, very inexperienced, and nothing to offer except my idea, I started to meet with key opinion leaders, the people being ages in surgical arena, just starting to talk to them. And my first meeting, I was scolded. This very known professor scolded me, basically very in public, saying, you use pictures in your presentation from my book and you don't even mention me. So I had to learn very quickly how I operate as a CEO, as a co-founder, as an entrepreneur. And the idea was rejected. So I came back very devastated. But on my flight back, I met a surgeon from New York, and he said, yes, I don't like the original idea, but you know what? I would really like a help with spreading large meshes during the minimal invasive surgery. And this is how we started our first startup, Polytouch Medical. It was sold to Covidian back then, just within 2 years of R&D at the very early stage. And this is how my entrepreneurial path started. Now I deal with different problem, but in the same field, in the field of minimal invasive surgery. How do I create instruments that make surgeons better surgeons, that make outcomes for the patient better?
Now, as you know, with the American healthcare system, there's famously a lot of inertia, and sometimes it's very difficult for physicians in America to adopt new technologies. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you face as a health tech entrepreneur in getting physicians and medical systems to adopt new technology?
Paradoxically, I didn't meet this attitude. I see that US surgeons love Israeli startups. I always felt welcome, and I always got an honest response. in terms of the idea and helping, my company wouldn't exist without the help of medical advisory board, which are all US surgeons. So I really own them all because I'm very grateful. Without their honest feedback and being with me and testing the device and being through the all steps of R&D, even coming to Israel, doing the labs here, they were very dedicated and very supportive. In terms of the adoption, then, okay, I received the FDA, so what's next? It's not a startup anymore. So here, yes, a lot of training is required. It's not just the level of key opinion leaders, it's a regular surgeons that are day and day during the operation, and they need the device to be perfect. So I think this is where we are right now, just meeting with surgeons and understanding their needs. And I know that their resistance, where it comes from. Imagine that you are trained for 20 years almost to be a surgeon the certain way, and now you have to change it completely. So it takes time. But now, finally, when they see their patient after follow-up period, and when they see their feedback, I believe that what we are doing, it's really helping the patients.
So let's go to your Kevin MD article, and it's titled, "Here's How Doctors Can Support MedTech Innovation." Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Because the role of surgeons, maybe it is underestimated. You know, when a startup make an exit or IPO, we usually talk about co-founders. We rarely talk about the surgeon's role. But I own a lot to surgeons. I'm not a surgeon. And the way that I'm talking is just describing my experience the first time in the OR as a MBA student, nothing connected to surgery, never. And being an observer there, standing in the corner and seeing a surgeon performing, for me, it was a realistic, really like a surreal experience, almost a miracle. This transition of surgeons from being just a minute ago a person to somebody else who is 100% focused. So being within this experience and seeing them performing their task, very difficult manual task, but in a very precise manner, it's almost like unhuman, you know, even in most complex surgeries. And this is where I come, and I start asking them, why do you this? And why do you this? And why you touch to, and why you cut here and not there? And they didn't really can answer. They just say, you know, we were trained this way. So there's a lot of knowledge that is rolling up centuries almost. Surgery and the suturing exists for more than 2,000 years. It's all built on service, while I'm coming somewhere in the mid-21st century and saying, okay, let's do it another way. And this is where we need them. The way they describe it suddenly changes their consciousness. Okay, really, why do I do this? Why do I screw into the soft tissue? Because it's not a wall. We know it cannot really hand something or hold something. Why do we not suture? Because there's no automatic suturing device. So why there is no automatic suturing device? And it's more like a behavior of a 5-year-old child when you ask why. When you're an entrepreneur, you kind of got to this stage again. And in order to have this conversation and keep developing, you have a surgeon or a parent to answer why. So this dialogue is super critical to any startup that develops medical devices.
Now, to my clinician audience who wants to get more involved with health tech startups, how can they make that connection with those type of companies? And how can they be more involved in that whole arena?
Just being open to proposals. When I think about my medical advisory board that run with us for the decade already, it's almost like a family. And the first time I met them were at the conference. They were the only one who agreed the first time to meet with me and to listen to my first crazy idea that was, now I know it was a nonsense, but they were open, they were gentle, and they were honest and suggestive. I just think, I know that surgeons are working very hard and almost they have no spare time really to spend with a lot of entrepreneurs. But for those who really want, they just have to make themselves open to meet young entrepreneurs and be engaged. My surgeons, I call them because I feel very connected to them. But even at the most difficult time when the R&D was stuck, they always helped us. They came to Israel, they did labs in Boston and in other countries. So making explanatory videos, this support is so valuable and so critical for medical device company success. I cannot really underestimate it.
Now, I was wondering if you could briefly take us through a life cycle of an idea. So can you go through the steps from your idea to a working prototype and tell me about those interactions that you have with your medical advisory board in between? How long does it take? What's the pathway?
It was difficult. My first idea, we are a team. I should say our first idea, it's always a brainstorming. Mm-hmm. It's never one person. So you talk with your team and you talk with surgeons. So the first idea came from playing with very exotic materials. Back then, as I told, Technion won 2 Nobel Prizes in chemistry. So it was very innovative. We started to look at new materials. We played with super elastic metals and we played with bioabsorbable materials. And we thought about combining them together. And then we said, okay, where can we apply it? And we talked to plastic surgeons, we talked to general surgeons, we talked to intensive care, just thinking where can we use it. And this is where it started. Immediately, plastic surgery said no, but general surgery said, in minimal invasive surgery, we have a great opportunity to have less impact on the body, less damaging to the tissue, but we do not have really instruments to do so. So, for example, back that time, in order to spread the mesh, you had to be very invasive using transfascial sutures to pull up the mesh and do it manually. So the whole concept of minimal invasive surgery was compromised by doing damage by transfascial sutures, which are very invasive and later very painful. When we hear it, we go back to our lab, we close the doors, and then we start trying various concepts. As soon as the concept get approval of, I would say, almost 100% of the surgeon. I would not start any project if I do not hear from most of the surgeons all over the globe, great idea, I love it, I need it, I want it. Otherwise, you would spare next 10 years just for nothing. You really need the surgeons to be engaged at the idea level. And then we go back and forth, the first prototype, the second prototype, the labs that we are doing together with the surgeons or without surgeons. My first lab was with schnitzel at home. So we do it on a bacon or something that similar. And then only when we see it's working, we go to the lab. So the first lab in Israel, the device didn't work. And it was very devastating for the surgeons who flew from Boston and from the US. And then we rapidly get back to the lab, fix it, come back next day, and then it worked. So one of the surgeons laughed, said, can the device come always with the co-founders? So you should market you both together. And they are exposed to everything. R&D is very tedious process. If I would know all the obstacles in advance, I'm not sure I would go through these parts, but it's also very rewarding. Because as soon as it works, and today, as soon as I know the patient's turning around healthy with my device inside, that will, of course, will absorb within a year, nothing will be left. So it's very grateful for this experience to be that impactful in the world. After R&D, there is a critical stage for FDA. This is where surgeons are performing clinical or preclinical study. We are working together on the protocols, and then holding fingers and waiting for FDA response. And then that starts the clinical or post FDA clinical stage where we start marketing. And this is very stressful because it's the first time that the device meets a real patient, all kind of patients and all kind of surgeons. It's not just a supportive medical advisory board, but any surgeon, and they have to use it and they have to be satisfied, and the patients should feel well. This is the most important part. So for me, it was the most stressful part. The R&D is fun. FDA is difficult, but you can do it. There's nothing stressful, either you pass or not. But as soon as you pass, all responsibility is on you.
We're talking to Lena Levin. She is a healthcare entrepreneur and co-founder of Via Surgical. She wrote the Kevin MD article, "Here's How Doctors Can Support MedTech Innovation." Lena, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think that surgical community, I talk more about surgeons, but really any physician, and maybe Kevin, you as a physician know it. I love the atmosphere of community. Even if I come to conferences, and I value this a lot, I really think that it should be in any professional community where people support each other, help each other. And I both experienced it as a co-founder of a medical device company, and also I see how surgeons treat each other. So I value it a lot. And maybe another message is that the motives, while external technology, we use it for ourselves, best phone, best pen, best tablet, best car. But here, this is very unique because you use technology, or surgeons uses technology for somebody else to make the outcome better, to make the patient feel better. And this shift of focus, it's very subtle, but it has a lot of impact, I think. And this is something that also founders are doing when we use technology to create a product for someone else to use.
Lena, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.